The Bible is a massive collection of over 66 books filled with countless stories that take place over 4,000 years. And hidden between two short chapters is the story of one of the coolest women in the Bible that I'm shocked people don't know more about. Although I've been in a bit of a Bible reading slump, I was addicted to this story when I found it. I just read over the story of Deborah and it's so good. It takes place during the book of Judges, where basically Israel is cycling through a bunch of different judges because they're all messing up and doing the wrong thing. And then Deborah shows up as the first and only female judge ever in the Bible, and she just does everything so differently and ends up changing the course of the rest of this entire book. I'm gonna be honest, I read over this story 3 more times before I moved on because it was just that good. The next day, I decided to read through the rest of the book of Judges to see how Deborah's story impacted the rest of the book, but I pretty quickly fell right back into my reading slump. I don't know how to best explain this, but I read a lot and I've been in a lot of reading slumps before, but I've never really been in a reading slump with the Bible. But lately it's just been like really hard to read. I've been kind of bored of it, and so I've been very slowly like dragging through some random books. The idea is that I would read the rest of the book of Judges, but if I'm being honest, I just wasn't sure if I'd be able to get through it all. Basically what's going on is that the Israelites have been sinning and messing up, and because of that they're getting punished for it. So currently they're being ruled by this Canaanite king. It seems like a guy who's a pretty ruthless leader. The people of Israel are pretty upset about that and they're crying out to God for help. So in response comes Deborah. And so she's basically used as this new instrument, this new good thing that takes Israel from this really desperate and difficult place and pulls them out and pulls them back into ruling over themselves and being in charge of their own people. And she does it in the coolest way possible. I tried reading more throughout the day, but I was really struggling to get through it. It's not like I didn't want to read the Bible. I just remember a time not too long ago where I could be so invested in the story that I'd be reading for an hour straight and not even realize it had been that long. Now I felt like I couldn't read a couple verses before wanting to stop. Deborah's a prophet, so she gets like words from God that she can speak to other people, and she calls for this guy, his name is Barak, and she tells him that God wants him to take a bunch of his soldiers and go after the Canaanite king and his army, and that if he goes and does that, he will have victory over them. But the soldier, Barak, hears this and he's unsure if it's really true or not. And so he tells Deborah that he'll only go and do it if she comes with him. And she says yes, which is like unheard of in the Bible. This reading slump is really like none other. I will say that reading Deborah's story is pretty interesting to me, and it's making me enjoy the Bible a little bit more for right now. But the hard thing is that Deborah's story takes place only over 2 chapters, and I don't have a lot of motivation to keep reading after those 2 chapters, if that makes sense. So I woke up the next day with a mission: get out of this reading slump and finish the rest of Judges and see how Deborah's story impacts the rest of the book. Okay, so it's the next morning. It's very bright. This morning I got up and tried to read some more of Judges, and I just had absolutely no motivation to. So I looked up 3 different tactics on how to get yourself out of a reading slump. Now obviously these have to do with regular like reading fiction books, not the Bible, but I figured it could like still apply in the same way. Just as they're about to go into battle, Deborah basically tells Barak that the Lord is going ahead of them and he's gonna fight for them. It says the Lord threw the entire Canaanite army just into sheer panic and they all ran away. And Deborah and Barak were able to chase everyone down and kill them except one person. His name was Sisera, and he was the commander of the Canaanite army. And it seemed like he escaped, but they really needed to kill him because he was the army general and you can't really defeat the army without defeating him. The first and biggest tip that I could find about getting out of a reading slump was to change the book you're reading. However, that doesn't really work for me because the whole point is to stick to this one book and try and push through it. But I did come up with a way to kind of change the book in a way. So this is my regular Bible that I usually read. I decided yesterday when I was running errands I was looking at some of the Bibles in Barnes & Noble and I found this one. This is a Message translation of the Bible, which basically means that it reads a lot more like a normal novel, if that makes sense. And that really interests me because one of my favorite parts about the Bible is the stories and like the plot. So I'm gonna start trying to read the rest of Judges in this version in hopes that it is a little bit more intriguing to me. So at this point in the story, the commander of the Canaanite army, his name is Sisera, has run away, and Deborah knows that he needs to die in order for them to secure this victory over the Canaanites. But Sisera runs away and he finds this woman in a tent and he asks if he can hide in it. Her name is Jael. Anyway, Jael is like, yeah, come stay in my tent. I'll protect you. It's all good. So he goes into her tent and falls asleep, and once he's asleep, Jael comes back in with a tent peg. So this book definitely has a much more contemporary language, which I do really enjoy. However, my interest in the context of what I'm reading isn't like that much bigger than it was before. So far, nothing's changed that much. Number 2 on my list is to change your reading format. This means that if you're used to reading words on a page, possibly change it to listening to an audiobook or even like reading on a Kindle or something like that. So I think I'm gonna listen to a little bit of Judges. Maybe that'll freshen it up for me. Maybe it'll make this story a little bit more interesting and hopefully take me fully out of this reading slump. There are a lot of really cool stories in Judges. However, the one thing that I find a little disappointing is that Deborah does so much work to like save the people of Israel. Pretty soon after that, like it doesn't take that long for the people of Israel to start sinning again. It's like kind of sad because you think about Deborah, all the work she did, everything she did to like save the people, and it didn't even last for that long. Okay, so I listened to like 3 or 4 chapters and it was really nice. I was able to listen to a lot in a pretty short period of time. Like I moved a lot quicker than I would have if I just read it. I'm gonna be honest though, almost the entire time I was thinking about the ending of Deborah's story and how insane it is. So I don't know if that necessarily means I'm out of the reading slump. Jael comes back in with a tent peg and essentially she kills him with it, which is a little graphic, but I think it just goes to show that God was working in multiple different people at the time to secure this victory for Israel and get them back to being the rulers of themselves. And then eventually Barak catches up to them and he's like, where is he? I need to kill this man. And Jael's like, oh, it's okay. I got you. He's already dead in my tent. I'm getting close to being done with the book of Judges. I've listened to it some. I also just went back to reading it more. It hasn't been bad per se, but it hasn't been the most fun thing in the world. I'm almost wondering if part of it has to do with Judges specifically. As I keep going through Judges, it's kind of like depressing because nothing good seems to last. Like any good judge that comes about and saves Israel, all their work seems to end up being useless because they always go back into their sin and get punished again. And but I do have one more little trick on how to get out of a reading slump that I think I'm gonna try. It is simply to take a break from reading. Nothing too crazy, at least for the rest of the day, and maybe see if spending a little bit of time away from it makes me miss it. I don't know. I spent the rest of this day just relaxing and doing anything but reading. Like I said, a big part of why I was struggling through Judges specifically is because it seemed like anytime something good would happen, another equally bad thing would follow right after. And that can be kind of depressing when you think about it that way. But as I took a break from reading and thought about it more, I started to see it from a different perspective. Like how even though the Israelites were very sinful people and did a lot of bad things and therefore got themselves into a lot of trouble, no matter how much bad they got themselves into, God was constantly pulling them back and saving them and helping them from their despair. Thinking about it more in the way of good always coming after the bad made a lot more sense to me, and it helped me enjoy the book a lot more. Okay, so I've taken a nice long break from reading. I've just been thinking more about Deborah and her role. Like I'm just realizing and seeing the good in there being just constant ups and downs in the Bible. No matter how far away the Israelites stray, it's like God always brings up one special good person to pull them back. He does that like over and over and over again throughout Judges, throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. It's usually the result of like one person's big heroic act until later Jesus comes and does it like once and for all in the biggest way possible. Just spending more time in Deborah's story helps me to realize the bigger picture of what's going on. And with all that I had discovered, the next thing I knew, a couple days later, I was finishing the book of Judges and suddenly realized that I had been reading for an hour straight and didn't even realize it because I was so invested in the story.